Okay, so let us now study our first body system for human anatomy and physiology, which is the integumentary system. And the integumentary system refers to our skin. So the integumentary system is the skin, plus you have the different accessory organs such as the hair, the glands, and the nails. And the skin is considered as one of the largest organs in our body. All right, and in terms of its area, it has an area. If you spread out our skin, it will cover an area of about 2 square meters. And our skin, including the fluids in it, would weigh about 10 to 11 pounds. And like what I mentioned earlier, the skin is considered the largest single organ of the body and also the largest sense organ of the body, because the skin is also a sense organ. And the study of the skin, the scientific study of the skin, is dermatology. So what are the different functions of the skin? Well, one of the major functions of the skin is the regulation of body temperature, or the control of body temperature. And I'm sure you are all aware that the cellular metabolism produces heat as its byproduct. Okay, the result of cellular metabolism produces heat, and this is one of the reasons why our body must regulate or control its temperature, and the skin plays a very important role in regulating our body temperature. Now, for example, if the temperature of the external environment is high, then our blood vessels begin to dilate. So there is dilation of blood vessels. Dilation means that the diameter of the blood vessel increases. And this dilation of the blood vessels will allow excess heat to be released. Also, if the temperature is high, then the body will also resort to sweating or perspiration. Okay, sweating will allow our body to cool off, because as water turns into gas, or as liquid turns into gas, it takes away the heat from the surface. This is what we call evaporative cooling. And this evaporative cooling will allow our body to lower down its temperature if the temperature of the external environment or even our body gets higher than normal. So sweating will allow our body to cool off through evaporative cooling. And again, because in physics, as water turns into gas or vapor, it removes or it absorbs the heat from the surface. Okay, this will allow a cooling effect. All right, so we call that evaporative cooling. Now, what about if the temperature outside or even inside the body got lower than normal? So what happens is that our blood vessels begin to constrict. So there's constriction of blood vessels. So constriction means that the diameter of the blood vessel decreases. Alright? So lumiliit yung parang lumen ng mga blood vessels. In contrast to dilate. No, dilate means that the lumen of the blood vessel increases. No, lumalaki yung diameter. So this constriction of blood vessels will allow the heat to be contained. Okay? So in order to preserve the remaining body heat, blood vessels begin to constrict. Or in Tagalog, we call this yung parang namumutla yung balat. No? Okay, pag nag-dilate yung mga blood vessels, parang namumula yung balat natin, no? Because of the blood vessels are dilated. Pag constricted naman, parang namumutla siya. Okay, another mechanism for preserving body heat or to maintain body heat even if the temperature outside is low is shivering, because we know that muscle contraction produces body heat. So this regulation of body temperature will allow homeostatic balance between the body and the external environment. This is a very important function of the skin in maintaining homeostatic balance, regulation of body temperature. Other functions of the skin includes the following: protection. Alright, protection means that our skin serves as a protective barrier that helps us to be protected from physical abrasion. Also, the skin is a waterproof covering that minimizes dehydration or the loss of water. Okay, and also as a protective barrier, the skin protects us from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So protection, the skin is a protective barrier or a protective covering that helps us be protected from physical forces, physical abrasion, dehydration or water loss due to the heat from the external environment that changes liquid water to vapor. And also as a protective barrier, our skin helps protect our body from UV rays from the sun. Also, the skin, as I mentioned earlier, is a sense organ. Sensation is also one of the major functions of the skin because the skin has receptors, nerve receptors that can detect pressure or even changes in temperature. So the skin having these sensory receptors makes it a sense organ. So the skin is the largest sense organ in our body. Our skin has nerve receptors that are sensitive to touch, vibrations, pain. Okay, and also changes in temperature. There are certain nerve receptors that can detect changes in temperature. Another function of the skin is that the skin also is an excretory organ. So the skin plays a role in excretion through the production of sweat. So you might think that sweat is only involved in temperature regulation. No, so sweating also eliminates excess water and salts, as well as small amounts of urea, which is a byproduct of metabolism, specifically protein catabolism. So sweating that eliminates excess water and salt makes the skin an excretory organ. Alright, so excretion also is a vital role of the skin in eliminating excess water, salts, and urea. Okay, number 5, the skin also plays a very important role in the maintenance of immunity. Okay, because there are certain cells in the skin that helps in the fight against foreign invaders, bacteria. And as a protective barrier as well, the skin serves as a protective barrier that prevents the entry of foreign invaders. Except siguro kung magkasugat kayo, but if we are free from any wounds, then the skin would really be an effective barrier against the entry of these pathogens, bacteria, viruses, parasites from the external environment. Okay, the skin also serves as a blood reservoir. Alright, again because of blood vessels in our skin that more or less store blood. Okay, so there's 8 to 10% blood in a resting adult. And lastly, we have the synthesis of vitamin D by the skin. The skin aids in the production of vitamin D by the exposure. Upon exposure to UV light, the skin produces vitamin D. Okay, so those are the different functions of the skin. Alright, in temperature regulation, in protection, the skin is a sense organ. The skin also plays an important role in excretion, the maintenance of immunity as a blood reservoir, and The skin aids in the synthesis of vitamin D upon exposure to UV light. Okay, vitamin D, by the way, is a very important component in the development of bone tissue. Alright, kaya nga 'di ba pag if you are exposed to the sun, at lalo na sa umaga, your bones would be a little sturdier, ganyan, di mas matibay yung mga buto natin if we are more or less exposed to the sun, because the skin produces vitamin D by exposure to light, and vitamin D helps in the production of bone tissue. Vitamin D aids in the absorption of calcium, and calcium is a very important component of bone. The matrix of bone tissue is calcium. If there are no questions, then let's proceed now to a detailed study of the layers of the skin. So like what I mentioned earlier, the skin is the largest organ in the body. At least 12 to 15% of our body weight makes up our skin, with a surface area of at least 1 to 2 meters, about the size of a living room rug or carpet. Okay, so ang skin natin, pag nilatag nyo yan, kasi laki yan ng carpet ng sala ninyo. Ganun. Okay, so what are the different layers of the skin? So the skin is made up of the following layers. So the outer layer of the skin is the epidermis. Beneath the epidermis is the dermis. And beneath the dermis is the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer. The subcutaneous layer is made up mostly of adipose tissue. Okay, so those are the major layers of the skin. The epidermis, beneath the epidermis is the dermis, and beneath the dermis is the hypodermis, or subcutaneous tissue. So let us now go into the details of these layers, starting with the epidermis. So we will now go into the details of the outermost layer, or the epidermis. Okay, so the epidermis is the outermost layer, and it is made up of the following sublayer. The dermis joined to the dermis by a basement membrane. Then above that basement membrane is the stratum basale, or the basal layer. And this is followed by stratum spinosum. Okay, above the basal layer, or sometimes the basal layer is called stratum germinativum. Above that is stratum spinosum. Above stratum spinosum is stratum granulosum, or the granular layer. Then we have stratum lucidum, which is found only in thick skin. Then above stratum lucidum is stratum corneum. Alright, stratum corneum is the outermost layer of the epidermis. Okay, so let us now go into the details, the description of the sublayers of the epidermis, starting with the basal layer, or stratum basale, or sometimes this is known as stratum germinativum. Okay, the stratum germinativum, or the basal layer of the epidermis, is the deepest layer, which is composed of a single layer of cells. And these cells are actively dividing through mitosis. This makes the epidermis highly regenerative. No, the cells of the stratum basale, or the basal layer, or stratum germinativum, the cells are actively dividing through mitosis. And what is the consequence of these actively dividing cells? So as new cells form, the older cells are pushed upwards. No, as new cells form, the older ones are pushed towards the skin surface, or the older cells above are pushed upwards. As new cells below are formed, then the older cells above it are being pushed upwards. Alright, so I hope you can visualize that yung sinasabi ko na as these cells begin to divide, the cells of the stratum basale or the stratum germinativum, the cells above it, yung mga matatandang cells above it are being pushed upwards. Okay, and what happens now to these older cells as they are pushed upwards? So slowly they die until they reach the stratum corneum, in which most of the cells in the stratum corneum are already dead. Okay, and as the older cells are pushed upwards, the cytoplasm, they begin to lose some of their cytoplasm until they would reach the stratum corneum, and that's the time they all die. That's why most of the cells in the stratum corneum are made up of mostly dead cells. So that's what happens in the basal layer, or stratum germinativum or stratum basale. The cells here are actively dividing through mitosis. And as new cells form, the older cells above it are being pushed towards the skin surface. Alright, so that's the function of the stratum basale, which is highly regenerative layer of the epidermis. Alright, now above the stratum basale is stratum spinosum. Okay, that's the next layer, the stratum spinosum, which is made up of spiny prickle cells that interlock to provide additional support to the skin. Okay, so that's the stratum spinosum layer. Alright, now baka magtaka kayo bakit nagiging spiny or prickle shape yung cells. Now, like what I mentioned earlier, as these older cells are pushed upwards, they lose some of their cytoplasm. So yung membrane nila form outgrowths, no? They produce outgrowths of the cells. So parang nagkakaroon ng parang mga extensions or outgrowths of the cell. Kaya nagmumukha silang spines. Okay? And these spines, they tend to interlock with other cells to form a some sort of a support or scaffolding to the stratum spinosum layer. So I hope you can visualize what I'm saying, no? Habang natutulak tong mga older cells sa pataas, they tend to lose some of their cytoplasm. So kulang na yung cytoplasm niya, so nagpo-produce sila ng outgrowths, no? Or some sort of extensions. Ang hirap i-describe. So parang extensions ng cell, no? Hindi ko naman masabing cilia, hindi naman sila cilia, basta mga extensions lang siya. And nagmumukha tuloy silang mga spines. Hence the term spinosum. Okay, or the cells are prickle shaped, no? Meaning parang may mga extensions dun sa cell. And these extensions, they tend to interlock, no? Giving scaffolding to the layer. Kaya linagay ko dito consist of spiny prickle shaped cells that tend to interlock, giving support to the skin. Alright, so that's stratum spinosum. Now, the next layer above stratum spinosum is stratum granulosum. And that's the next layer, stratum granulosum. Alright, so let's study the description of stratum granulosum. So this is about 3 to 5 cell layers in thickness, and they contain diamond-shaped cells with keratohyalin granules and lamellar granules. Okay, keratohyalin granules contain keratin precursors that eventually aggregate, cross-link, and form bundles. The lamellar granules contain the glycolipids that get secreted to the surface of the cells and function as a glue, keeping the cells stuck together. So this is how the layer got its name, granulosum, because of these granules. So you have keratin granules or keratohyalin granules that contain the precursors of keratin. No? Keratinize yung mga cells dito sa stratum granulosum. And you have lamellar granules that contain glycolipids that keep the cells glued together, again giving additional scaffolding to the layer, stratum granulosum. That's how the layer got its name, no? Because of these granules. Keratohyalin, which are the precursors of keratin. So eventually yung layer na yan gets keratinized. And itong mga lamellar granules, no, that contains glycolipids that keeps the cells stuck together, giving additional scaffolding to the stratum granulosum. So that's stratum granulosum that is keratinized. So most of the cells here are keratinized, again because of keratin. Alright, produced by those cells, yung keratohyalin granules. Okay, then above the stratum granulosum layer is stratum lucidum. Okay, stratum lucidum is about 2 to 3 cell layers in thickness, and stratum lucidum is present only in thick skin, no, sa mga makakapal yung balat, no? Like for example, in the palms and in the soles of our feet. So this is a thin, clear layer consisting of eladin, which is a transformation product of keratohyalin. Alright, so ito ay makikita lang sa ano to, sa makakapal na balat, no, like sa soles and sa palms natin. Pwede rin dito sa daliri, no, pag callus. Alam niyo ibig sabihin ng callus, yung may kalyo. Okay, di ba? So, to add more protection, let's say if you're playing guitar, to protect the fingertips, medyo kumakapal yan. So, yun yung stratum lucidum. That gives additional protection to the skin dito, no, when it is subjected to external forces. Okay, and lastly, above the stratum lucidum is stratum corneum. Okay, so let us now proceed with the outermost layer of the epidermis, which is stratum corneum. The stratum corneum layer is the outermost layer of the skin, composed of rows of dead cells. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, no, habang tumataas, habang natutulak pataas yung mga older layers, they tend to lose their cytoplasm, nagiging keratinized na yung mga cells until when they reach the outermost layer, yung stratum corneum, they die. Kaya ang description natin dito, itong stratum corneum is composed mostly of dead cells, rows of dead cells. These cells contain keratin, which keep the skin elastic, and keratin provides a waterproof layer to protect the cells from dehydration. Kaya linagay ko dito, protects the underlying cells from drying out. So that's stratum corneum. And yung mga cells dito sa stratum corneum, since patay na yung mga yan, most of them are dead, they tend to flake off, no, at the skin surface. So dead cells are flaking off at the skin surface. So ibig sabihin nito, yung parang nababalatan tayo, ganun. Ito yung parang libag, no? Pag naliligo tayo, tapos pag kinukuskus natin yung balat natin, di ba, parang may ano. Actually, yun yung mga cells na yan, no, na nasasama. And pag nagtatwalya tayo, okay, pag nagtatwalya tayo, na nagpe-flake off din yan. Alright guys, so those are the different layers of the epidermis. So the innermost layer is the stratum germinativum, wherein the cells are actively dividing through mitosis. And as new cells are formed, the older cells are being pushed upwards. Then above that is stratum spinosum, which is made up of spiny, prickle-shaped cells. They are prickle and spiny in form because of the lesser cytoplasm, which forms extensions of the cell forming spines. Okay, and these spines, they tend to interlock with the other cells of the layer, forming a scaffolding to the stratum spinosum. Then above the stratum spinosum is stratum granulosum, which is made up of keratin granules, Okay, and above that is stratum lucidum, which is found only in thick skin. And we have stratum corneum, which is made up mostly of dead cells that tend to flake off. Okay, so those are the different layers of the epidermis. Let us now go into the details of the cells, no? Some of the important cells of the epidermis. So there are 4 major cells that comprises the epidermis. So we have the keratinocytes, melanocytes, Langerhans cells, and Merkel cells. Now, I'm sure you have heard of these cells, no? Keratinocytes, melanocytes, Langerhans cells, and Merkel cells. Now, let's describe in detail keratinocytes. Okay, so keratinocytes are the predominant cell type of the epidermis. Okay? Yan. Kaya ang epidermis kasi ay keratinized. Alright? So, keratinocytes are the predominant cell type of the epidermis and originate in the basal layer. These keratinocytes, itong mga cells na ito ay galing sa basal layer or stratum germinativum. And by the name itself, keratinocytes, these are the cells that produces keratin. Okay, and are responsible for the formation of the epidermal water barrier by making and secreting lipids. So, itong water barrier na to, yung keratin to because keratin makes the skin a waterproof barrier. Keratinocytes also regulate calcium absorption by the activation of cholesterol precursors by UV radiation to form vitamin D. So itong mga keratinocytes, upon exposure to UV rays from the sun, they help regulate calcium absorption. Okay? And they also aid in the production of vitamin D, which is very important in bone development. So that's how we describe these keratinocytes. Okay, next we have the melanocytes. Alright, melanocytes are derived from neural crest cells and by the name itself, they produce melanin. Now, these are the cells that produces melanin, which is responsible for pigmentation of the skin. Our skin, its color. If you're dark-skinned, if you are fair-skinned, or dark skin, yan, protein, melanin is responsible for that. They are found between cells of the stratum basale and again, these cells, melanocytes, they produce melanin. What stimulates melanin production? Again, sunlight. The UV radiation stimulates melanin secretion which forms a protective barrier against UV radiation, acting as a built-in sunscreen. Okay, so in short, melanin protects us from harmful UV rays. The darker the skin, the more the skin is protected from UV rays. Okay? So yung mga dark skin dyan, you are more protected from UV rays than yung mga mapuputi. Okay, so those are the melanocytes. They are responsible for the pigment of the skin, which is melanin. So we have keratinocytes, we have melanocytes. Next, we have Langerhans cells. So ito yung mga melanocytes na nasa basal layer. Ayan. And they are important in the production of melanin, which forms the skin pigmentation. Melanin protects us from UV rays and it gives our skin yung color niyan, kung if you're dark skin or white skin. The darker the skin, the more melanin you have, and the more you are protected from UV rays. Next, we have the Langerhans cells. So Langerhans cells or dendritic cells are our skin's first line of defense, the first line defenders. And they play a significant role in antigen presentation. These cells need special stains to visualize, and they are primarily found in the stratum spinosum. So again, this is the stratum spinosum. Ito yung pink cells na ito. And nandito yung Langerhans cells. So they play an important role in immunity. no, fighting foreign invaders. So dendritic meaning may mga branches yung membrane, yung cytoplasm, as you could see in this illustration. Dendritic meaning may mga branches, parang dendrites ng neurons. Pero hindi to sensory cell, ha? These Langerhans cells, they protect us, no, from antigens and other foreign invaders. First line of defense ng ating balat. Okay? And lastly, we have these Merkel cells. Merkel cells are oval-shaped cells, modified epidermal cells found in the stratum basale, directly above the basement membrane. So ito, no? Ayan, itong yellow na ito. Ito yung Merkel cell. These cells serve as sensory function. They serve a sensory function as mechanoreceptors for light, touch, and they are most populous in the fingertips. Ayan, kaya medyo sensitive yung ating fingertips. Though also found in the palms, soles, sa lips, and genital mucosa. Those are the Merkel cells. They serve as a sensory function, mga mechanoreceptors yung mga yan, yung mga Merkel cells for light, touch, and there are many of them dito sa fingertips natin. Okay, so those are the 4 major types of cells found in the epidermis. Okay, so again, we have the keratinocytes that produces keratin. Okay, that serves as a waterproof layer or covering for the skin. Then we have the melanocytes that protects us from UV rays through the production of melanin, and that is responsible also for our skin pigmentation, skin coloration. Okay, then we have the Langerhans cells, which is our first line of defense against foreign invaders. And lastly, we have the Merkel cells that serves as mechanoreceptors. Now, that helps us detect the presence of light, pressure, and what? And other stimuli of the external environment. So we'll proceed now to the next layer, which is the dermis or the true skin. The dermis, also known as true skin, is the layer beneath the epidermis. Alright, its major parts are collagen. Collagen makes the tissue with added tensile strength na yung collagen. Together with the mga elastic fibers, di ba yan? Reticular fibers. Okay, that adds additional support to the dermis. And elastic fibers. Yan ito, yung connective tissue, yung loose connective. Okay, that adds flexibility. So, we have the following fibers that makes up the dermis. So, we have collagen. Okay, that adds tensile strength to the dermis. Then we have reticular fibers and elastic fibers that aids in the flexibility of the tissue. Okay, the dermis also has many nerve endings that provides the sense of touch, and these nerve endings can also detect changes in temperature. That makes our skin a sense organ. So the dermis has many of these nerve endings. Okay, aside from nerve endings and those fibers like collagen fibers, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers, the dermis also contains the following accessory parts, no, like hair follicles, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, and including blood vessels. Okay, so vascular ang dermis. Okay, the blood vessels in the dermis provide nourishment and waste removal to its cells. Okay, so anyway, ito, no, sa dermis, you could see those accessory structures like the hair follicles. We have the glands, both the sweat glands. Ito yung parang coiled structure. That's the sweat gland. Yung sebaceous gland, it is near the hair follicle. Nandito siya. Alright, then we have these nerve endings, okay, sa dermis, and also blood vessels. And you have the different fibers, no, like collagen, reticular, and elastic fibers. No? So basically, the dermis is made up of loose connective tissue. Okay, and the dermis is made up of these two major layers. We have the papillary layer or the papillary dermis and the reticular layer of the dermis. The papillary layer is the upper layer, and it is thinner compared to the reticular layer, and the papillary layer is composed of loose connective tissue. Okay? And closest siya dun sa epidermis via the basement membrane. Ayan, no? So ito yung papillary layer. Ayan, ito parang wavy na to. Ayan, no? Papillary layer yan. And beneath the papillary layer is the reticular layer, which is the deepest layer of the dermis. It is thicker than the papillary layer, less cellular, and it is made up of dense connective tissue. Okay, ito yung dense irregular connective tissue. So tandaan yan guys, ang dermis is made up, especially the reticular layer, is made up of dense irregular connective tissue composing of these fibers, like collagen, reticular, and elastic fibers. Okay, the dermis, itong reticular layer also houses the sweat glands. Andyan yung mga sweat glands sa reticular layer, yung mga hair follicles, and even the arrector pili muscle that is connected to the hair follicle, di ba? Alright, yung mga nerve endings, sensory neurons, and blood vessels. Those are the different structures that makes up the dermis. So in the dermis, you have the following structures. So you have the hair follicles, you have the glands. Ito yung sweat glands na coiled. Then we have the sebaceous gland, which is attached to a hair follicle. Alright, then you have here the arrector pili muscle. Nasa reticular layer yan, which is attached to the hair follicle. When the arrector pili muscle contracts, it pulls the hair follicle, and ano yung result niyan? This will give you goosebumps, diba? That will give you goosebumps. Then we have these nerve endings, okay, that makes the skin sensitive to external stimuli. And we have blood vessels, arteries, veins, capillaries, mga blood vessels na yan that are found in the dermis. So that's the dermis. So again, the dermis is made up of these two layers, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Okay, so I guess we can now proceed with some of the accessory structures that are found in the skin. Now, starting with the hair. Okay, so hairs, basically, these are epidermal. The hairs, they are epidermal outgrowths of the skin that functions in protection. Ayan. So, ano siya? Additional barrier yan ng balat natin. Kaya di ba yung mga hayop, may mga hayop talaga makapal yung fur or yung hair that aids in protection. Protection from external forces, protection against sudden changes in temperature. So, yun yung function ng buhok. Okay, so parts of the hair includes the following. So, you have the shaft, the root, and the follicle. Yan, ito yung shaft. Yung shaft, ito yung sinusuklay natin. Yan yung hair shaft. Then, beneath that is the root. The root is surrounded by the hair follicle. Okay, so ito yung root, yung pinakailalim, then ito yung hair follicle. Yung hair follicle is made up of actively dividing cells. Kaya tumataas yung, or humahaba yung hair shaft. Alright, so again, those are the major parts of the hair shaft, root, and follicle. And surrounding the strand of hair, you have the sebaceous glands. Okay, so the sebaceous gland is attached to the hair follicle. The sebaceous gland produces oil, which we will discuss later. And also you have the arrector pili muscle. Okay, and I think I already mentioned the function of the arrector pili muscle. So since it is attached to the hair follicle, when the arrector pili muscle contracts, it pulls the hair follicle, causing goosebumps. No? Okay, and you have the hair root plexus, which is actually a nerve ending that is sensitive to touch. So nasa ano yan, it surrounds the hair follicle. Okay, hair growth and replacement have a cyclic pattern. So, yan, because of the hair follicle, there are cells there that are actively dividing. So, yung hair shaft, nag-grow siya, humahaba. Okay, and yung replacement naman yan, normally we lose about 10 to 20 strands of hair a day, which is normal. Pero habang tumatanda tayo, especially the male experiences what we call pattern baldness. Now, again, because of increase in testosterone. Male pattern baldness is a sex influence trait. Sex influence because for the males, it is dominant. And it is the baldness gene is influenced by testosterone. Unlike sa female kahit na heterozygous yung female, the female will never experience pattern baldness. Okay, pero pag ang female nasa kanya yung recessive genes for baldness, their hair gets thinner. Numinipis lang yung buhok. Pero sa lalaki talaga nakakalbo. Alright? Okay, so that's the hair. Alright, next we have nails. Nails are basically plates of highly packed keratinized cells. And the function of the nails is for protection. It protects our fingertips, di ba? Ayan, no? Highly packed keratinized cells, ito medyo matigas, rigid, that forms a protective shield sa ating fingertips. And also nails are good for scratching. Scratching pag nangati, di ba? Alright, and manipulation, yan, di ba? Yung kuko, lalo na pag mahaba yung kuko, you can manipulate a lot of things. Na parang ano siya, high precision tool, yung ating kuko. Lalo na pag mahaba yung kuko, di ba? For manipulation. Alright, and nails are formed by cells in the nail bed called the matrix, which is in the area of the lunula. So, ito yung lunula, yung puti. So, pansinin nyo yung kuko ninyo, di ba parang may puti dun sa base niya. No, that's the lunula, and the lunula is made up of actively dividing cells. Kaya, humahaba yung kuko natin. No, about 1 millimeter per week. Pero parang di ako naniniwala dito sa 1 millimeter. Kasi weekly nga ako nagne-nail cutter eh. O every week ako, every Sunday kasi humahaba. No? Parang di ako naniniwala dito sa 1 mm per week na to. Ayan, and the nail, ano to? Waterproof again because it is covered with an eponychium, which is also the cuticle. Ayan, no? Eponychium. So that's the lunula. Lunula from the word luna. Lunula, luna parang ano siya, crescent moon, di ba? Yan yung puti na yan. Parang siyang crescent or gibbous-shaped moon. Alright, so next we have the skin glands. Yan, so we're done with the hair, nails. Ito guys, itong hair and nails, hindi sila vascularized, no? They are not supplied with blood, so avascular sila. And parang ano to, keratinized yung cells. So technically, ito yung mga structure sa katawan natin na parang patay. No, itong nails, habang humahaba, and even yung buhok natin, no? Yung lalo sa may, ito habang mga patay yung mga yan eh. Okay, so pag tinanong sa inyo, ito, ano yung mga dead parts ng katawan, hindi yung hair saka yung nails, no? Alright, so next we have the skin glands. Now we have two major types of skin glands. We have the sebaceous or oil glands and the sweat glands. Now the sebaceous or oil glands, they are usually connected or attached to hair follicles. They are also known as holocrine glands. And these sebaceous glands, by the name itself, oil glands, they secrete fats, cholesterol, proteins, salt, and cell debris. Alright, especially fats and cholesterol. Now that's how they got the name sebaceous, sebo or oil glands. No, sebo, oil, fats, cholesterol. And the function of the sebaceous glands or oil glands is to moisten the hair. Not only the hair, it moistens the skin and keeps the skin waterproof. Okay, so that's the sebaceous gland which is attached to the hair follicle. Ayan. Okay, then we have the sweat gland. Okay, so or sudoriferous gland, sweat glands or sudoriferous glands. There are two major types of sweat glands found in the skin. We have the eccrine sweat glands and the apocrine sweat glands. Alright, the eccrine sweat glands are also called merocrine glands, and they secrete basically water. Most of it is water and excess salts and urea, no waste. Okay, that makes the skin an excretory organ because of the secretions of these eccrine sweat glands, no, which is mostly water. And the eccrine gland also releases excess salts and urea. And the major function of the eccrine sweat glands is to regulate body temperature, no, to cool the body. Kasi di ba nga water, when water turns into vapor, it removes excess heat on the surface of the skin. Ang tawag natin dyan ay evaporative cooling. Alright? So, di ba pag pinawisan kayo, kunyari, pinawisan kayo, lalo na dito sa noo, di ba hindi naman malagkit? Basically, tubig lang to eh. Sa noo, sa dibdib, sa likod, ganyan, no? Hindi siya malagkit kasi tubig lang yan. And the function of the secretion of the eccrine sweat gland is to regulate body temperature, to cool the body, especially during extraneous physical activity. Alright, then we have the apocrine sweat gland. Apocrine sweat glands, they are larger and they are also called merocrine glands. And these apocrine sweat glands are attached again to hair follicles. Parang sebaceous glands yan, no? Nandun din sila near hair follicles. And they are more viscous, meaning malapot. Bakit malapot ang secretion? Hindi siya tubig, no? Malapot siya because of these fatty acids and proteins. And the viscosity of the apocrine sweat glands, yung secretions niya, it attracts bacteria. Okay? So, ang bacteria, kinakain niya itong mga fatty acids and proteins, and as a result of the presence of bacteria, odor occurs. So, ito yung tinatawag natin na putok. No? Pag ang mga apocrine, nandito sa kilikili natin. Sa kilikili, sa singit. No? Kaya pag may secretion yung kilikili, mabaho. No, because of the viscosity of the secretion, which is attractive to bacterial growth. Alright, so this is the eccrine sweat gland, yung coiled, no? Ayan, no? Ito that produces water, removes excess salt and urea. Ito naman yung apocrine, which is near a hair follicle, kasi ito yung hair follicle, no? Ayan, ito. Yung kanyang duct nasa hair follicle. Yung eccrine hindi eh, di ba? Pero itong apocrine, nandun siya sa hair follicle. No, doon nakakabit yung yung duct. Yung duct meaning yung tubo. Ayan. So yung apocrine sweat glands, makikita yan sa armpits, saka sa singit, sa inguinal area. And yung secretions niya invites bacterial activity, producing foul odor, yung body odor tinatawag natin. Alright, then next we have the ceruminous glands, also known as modified sudoriferous glands, which secrete cerumen, yung earwax. Nasa natin yan, sa ear canal. Okay, these glands produces cerumen or earwax. Okay, and lastly, we have the mammary glands. This is a sex-limited structure which is found only in females. And these mammary glands secretes milk. Okay, sa lalaki walang ganyan, no? Ang mammary glands, modified sudoriferous, modified sweat glands yan, found only in females that produces milk. Okay, so I guess those are some of the accessory structures found in the skin. Okay, skin color again is due to melanocytes. The more melanocytes, the darker is the skin. Okay, and melanin is triggered by exposure to UV rays. So the more you are exposed to UV rays, the more melanin is produced by the melanocytes. The inability of the melanocytes to produce melanin is a genetic defect, and this is called albinism. All right, and environmental factors are involved in the production of melanin, no? Like exposure to UV light.